Now, Mimi, we ended the conversation last time after talking about the whole your life and your family by
Hmm.
observing that both of us had Irish roots.
Yes, we
And
do.
you dug deep, deep into your genealogy and wrote a book about it called Irish Roots.
Yes,
Now, your
yes.
dad, and this is where I want to start, your dad didn't think he was Irish.
He was adopted. He knew his mother was Irish because he had the adoption papers. It said who his mother was. So he hated the Irish because his mother put him in an orphanage, of course. But he thought he was only part Irish. His father that adopted him lied and told him he was his real father, not adopted, real blood, and that he was Sicilian.
Okay. The reason I like this is both of them. If you think Irish and Sicilian, uh, immediately things come to mind with both, right? Both
Yeah.
genealogies. Now, your dad, as you talked about last time, had a substance abuse problem. How much
Mhm.
of his identity, besides that, how much
Yeah.
of his identity was formed thinking his ancestors were Sicilian rather than Irish?
Complete. He completely convinced himself that he was Sicilian. He learned how to speak the language at a very young age.
My.
And yeah, he was a very smart man. He found out he went to Sicily. He went to the town where his father was born, Ribera, and he found relatives that had the same last name, who he thought were his cousins. And he had a fabulous time there. And they ended up sending um, one of their kids to visit us. Okay. So he was convinced he was Sicilian. In fact, he went twice. He went over there twice to visit.
Well,
And yeah, and his cousin, his one cousin, he thought, came here, and this was really something. Our newspaper, the Scranton Times, had a big story with pictures and everything about how my father found his relatives in Sicily.
this
And
is great.
it's great. And I had the chart made up because this cousin was not a genealogist. He was more than that. He went back farther. He did, I can't think of the term for it. He had a big chart that he brought from Sicily, and he went back hundreds of years. He went back to Julius Caesar.
Oh my Lord.
And so that's why we have the newspaper article. And he said that my father's family, the Sicilian family that really wasn't the family, was actually back in Julius Caesar's time had a Roman, they called them secretaries for Julius Caesar. One of Julius Caesar's secretaries. They're the guys that take the note and run to the next camp with it.
Wow.
I know. That's how far back he went.
Wow.
Now, he's correct for his family,
Correct. Yeah.
but my father's little tail at the end doesn't belong there.
Well, and that was passed along to you. So your whole growing up, you thought, hey, Sicilian.
Absolutely. I met people. I went over there
Yeah.
myself later on and I met these same people. I stayed with them thinking I was blood.
Well, and you talked about it in your neighborhoods. You dated, your neighborhood was full. You,
And that was Irish kids that I was friends with and found out when I did Unearthing My Irish Roots, which is the book about finding them. I found out kids I played with were probably second with their cousins.
so you
And
grew
my
up thinking they're friends and now they're related to you.
Yes, and my father had a half brother that lived 6 blocks away his whole life, and he never knew.
He never knew.
No, because his Irish father had a son with another woman. So he had the son with this woman that my father knew was his mother, and then he had a son with another woman. So that made him a half brother.
After you
Mhm.
did your research and wrote your book, did you happen to go back to any of those second cousins and say, "Hey, we ain't
Yes,
just friends, we're related"?
yes, yes, I did. Um, the what she can't find it. She can't find where our relationship uh, connects. And I said, I gave her the names, but you got to do the work,
Yeah,
especially about
yeah.
second and third. So yeah, that was Brennan's. And then I found and talked to a cousin, Scanlon, that was actually the half brother's daughter
Wow.
that lived
Did
6 blocks away. So I had a cousin that lived 6 blocks away. So she would, I don't know what that would be. If he was half, let's see, what would that make her?
uh
A half cousin?
I don't know. I don't
I
know.
don't understand
Related
that.
to you in some way. Do you think it
Yeah,
would have changed your dad's how might it have changed? I know you're guessing. Your dad's perception of himself and his life if he would have known the truth.
100%.
In what way?
100%. Because he would have known these people he was related to. The
Hmm.
family he thought he was in, the Italian family, his adopted mother, her family snubbed him.
Mm.
They didn't accept him. His adopted mother didn't really accept him. She called him names and told him to go back to the whore that had him, told him that in Italian. And so he was kind of lonely
Mm.
because on the father's side, the so called father, who was not really his biological father, he had no relatives over there. All the relatives were on the wife's side, and she hated this child, right? So he didn't have like a big happy family, you know. And if he had known about his Irish family, that he had a half brother 6 blocks away, we would have had a lot more people in our life for
Yeah.
sure. And I
Did,
so I think 100% difference.
did you know the half brother?
No, I did not. He would have been my father's age, maybe a few years
Yeah.
younger.
So
No,
he,
that's right. I'm correcting myself when I looked it up. They were born the same year. He
mm.
had my father with the woman that was not his wife, and then he had a son with the woman that was his wife, and they were born the same year, 1927. So he was an alcoholic, and we had a lot of neighborhood bars. And I say they might have drank together and ever,
Right. Right.
but
Well,
yeah.
how do now when you're doing this,
Mm.
I wanted to talk about this because families, I think, are interesting to me. I've done family therapy I did it for a long time, and
Okay.
the secrets we keep
God.
are so not healthy. And so you're doing the research, and you
Mm.
just must have picked it up and started doing it. What did you think? Well, I mean, I gotta imagine, what was it like when you said, "Oh my,"
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you found out the truth? What did you do? Who'd you tell?
Well, the first thing, well, of course, I told immediate family. Um,
Did they
it,
believe you?
oh, I believe, of course, they
Oh,
believe me, but it didn't like, they didn't know those grandparents. I
mm,
did. That would have been their great grandparents, the people that adopted my father. I did not know them because my grandfather that adopted my father died before I was born. And the wife died when I was about maybe 5 or 6 years old. So I really didn't know them. And I barely knew the other side of the family, the Italian side of the family that was very distant to us. Okay. I I was close to my mother's side of the family who were
mm,
Italian. So I had a bunch of cousins. I was the oldest. I was the first one born in the Italian, real Italian, mother's side. So I was the oldest of all the cousins. And my family only had 4 children, but the rest of them all had 6, 7, 8 children. So I had lots of cousins. I had
wow.
lots of cousins. Yeah. So and they all married my aunts. Well, it's my one aunt, she married an Italian, so her children were full Italian. Okay. And she had 6 kids. Right. And then the other one's married, Polish or whatever, but they knew what the mix was,
Sure.
right? Yeah.
Did it change your perception of yourself too? Do you now celebrate St. Patrick's Day?
The funny thing of it is, like, Scranton, Pennsylvania, speech today. Scranton, Pennsylvania is a big Irish town,
Yeah.
and they celebrate St. Patrick's Day pretty much the whole month of March.
Well,
Well, they have the lead up to it. We have a St. Patrick's Day parade, and then they have the actual day itself. And don't forget, I was in the bar business.
yeah.
So St. Patrick's Day for my adult life was a big deal. And I would bring up the fact that I was 1/4 Irish because I knew about the mother, but I didn't know I was really half Irish. Yeah.
Yeah. Could have sold
Yes.
more green beer.
I probably would be more motivated. I would get into it more. Trust me, Mike, I got into it enough.
Yeah. Yeah, right. We talked about that the last time, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. One of my favorite parts the last time's conversation was that you got while in rehab, you got cards from the beer
Beer
distributors for your.
distributors. Yeah.
I just think that's great. Well, I mentioned
I got
St.
flowers. I got huge bouquets
That's
of
great.
flowers. And the other people in the rehab thought I was some kind of actress or something because they come in with these huge bouquets. I got at least 3 of them. My
What people
husband,
believe, they believe.
husband didn't know anything about anonymity.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the reason I mentioned St. Patrick's Day is my dad, Irish through and through, was his birthday's in March. So when you said the whole month, you're not kidding.
No, I'm not.
And he had a problem. People who listen to this know my dad was had an alcohol problem. And so Mimi, we didn't see him. March was Bender month. And so from his birthday through St. Patrick's Day, he was even when he was around, he was gone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, you have the Italian side, but
Yeah.
then your dad's substance abuse problems just kind of went with the territory, huh?
It's interesting to me that my mother's side of the family, which definitely was Italian, when I met some of them that lived in Italy, nobody seemed to have a drinking problem. They drank wine with
Hmm.
dinner. It was just the thing to do. But no one seemed to be an alcoholic, or I didn't hear any stories of that. Right.
Hmm.
And that to me was interesting. And on my mother's side, too, like none of her sisters were alcoholics. Her brother wasn't an alcoholic. There were some mental issues with some
Hmm.
of the sisters, but the alcoholism wasn't there. I bring that up because I really think there was a genetic part to that, the alcoholism. I believe that. There's genetic, and then the fact that he grew up in such a terrible environment, a cold, unloving household, that kind of thing, feeling alone. And I think he drank to be with other people, you know. He liked
A
to go
lo-
to the bars. Yeah.
a
Hmm.
lot of people say that, whatever gaps they had growing up, when they discovered drinking or drugs, it fills a hole.
Yeah,
And if you haven't learned to fill the hole in another way, it becomes much more attractive.
exactly.
How far back did you go? You went, when reading your book, you went, how'd you do it? How long did it take? You went way back.
It took me a few months. I used DNA ancestry,
Oh,
and um, they see that's the great thing. The people that have done it that matched me, I would look them up and see how close our matches was. And that's how I did the tree. So, I would find out, okay, this person I'm related to, let's see if I can find their mother, you know.
mm.
So then I would find their mother, but wouldn't have who the husband was. So then I'd have to do some more digging to find out who the husband was. And then I'd find the children. It was kind of fun. It
Yeah.
was it was time consuming. Sometimes I'd go down the rabbit hole and I'd say, "Oh, I'm doing this. for hours. I got to stop and feed my husband, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a hobby, right?
Yeah, it was more than that because it was like finding out a lot of stuff I did not know. So yeah, I went back to, I want to say 18th century
Hmm.
County Mayo. Yeah, pretty much around the potato famine and all that stuff. I went there, um, and found out a lot of my relatives moved to Scranton, Pennsylvania from County Mayo. And my real grandmother and my real grandfather both were from County Mayo, different towns, Sligo and Roscommon. And I don't know, I don't think they knew each other in Ireland. Okay. And I say this in the book when I looked up the records, his birth record, hers, etc. I think she must have been raped because
Mm.
he was like 10 years older than her and she was like 14.
Wow.
And Catholic Irish people, you did not have babies unmarried. It
Mm.
just was not acceptable. So I am positive they put her in the St. Joseph's. They had an orphanage and a place for unwed mothers.
Wow, that must have rang a bell.
Well, yeah, yes, it did, because that's where my father was born. And I think they probably had her there when she started to show. I think they sent her there away from people's sight. They kept it a total secret.
Sure.
So until he was born, and then she could go home, right? And he was there till he was 4 years old.
Mm.
That's why it's like I used to think to myself, if this is his real father and he knew he was there, why did he wait till he was 4 years old?
Hmm.
Yeah.
You talked about going to Sicily. Have you been to did you go to County Mayo?
I haven't done that yet because, this is all fairly recent, the last couple of years that I found this stuff out. I've been to Italy twice,
Mm.
and I met relatives from both sides. And when I told the relatives that weren't really my relatives, that I found out they really weren't my blood relatives, they didn't care. They said,
That's
no,
great. Yeah,
no, we're still cousins. We love you. You come
that's right.
anytime, stay with us, whatever. Because we had gotten to know them, you know. Yeah, that's something, isn't it? Mm.
Well, it is. And if you go, first of all, I've been there. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. Um, yeah, one of my memories is flying. When you fly in, if the sun is out, which is iffy,
Yeah,
um, you see every shade. They talk about green. Well, it's not just green; it's every shade of green you ever thought of.
really.
Yeah, and so it's fascinating, and the people are equally gregarious and welcoming. That's I wasn't allowed to stay in a hotel. I had to stay with relatives, and the house
Yep,
that my grandparents built and grew up in, the lady invited me in for lunch. I don't even know her. I just show up, and
yeah, yeah.
next thing you know, she's cooking for me. So,
That's what happened in Italy. I They wouldn't let me stay in a hotel, and my cousin that lives in Alberobello, which is beautiful. It's actually an Italian tourist town, so Italians go there on vacation
mm,
because it's rustic and has this specific type of buildings that they lived in called trulli, and they're built in an odd way out of bricks and a certain I'll have to have a picture at the end of the notes. But anyway, they had me stay with them, didn't pay for a thing. They wouldn't even let me pay for souvenirs.
wow.
And and the only thing talking about culture and alcohol, wine in Italian is very acceptable, very acceptable. And my birthday happened to be the same time. They threw me a beautiful birthday party at a hotel. And of course, this one woman that I did not know, I wasn't related to her, she didn't know I was an alcoholic, you know.
Mm,
So she kept pushing me to have this wine. She said, "You have to taste this wine. This is the best wine you're ever going to have. You have to have a taste." And I didn't want to tell her, you know, well, I don't have to tell her. I just kept saying no. And she was like pushing that wine at me. She said, "Just take a sip."
Wow.
So, so finally I said to her, I'm allergic. I'm allergic to wine.
Did she buy that?
Well, yeah, then she backed off. But I
Yeah.
mean, really,
Yeah. Well, think
this,
about that. And I don't
it,
expect you to have the answer to this, but Mimi,
oh no.
Italian wine, French wine, Russian vodka, Irish beer, Irish whiskey. Why do there's a lot of cultural associations with alcohol, you
Hmm.
know?
Which
Uh,
type of alcohol they drink too.
yeah, yeah. A
Russians,
lot.
it's vodka, right? Yeah.
Why does alcohol sometimes define a culture?
Well, I think because of the type of alcohol has to do with the culture. Because in Russia, potatoes are a big crop, and they make vodka in Russia. That's their most prominent alcohol is vodka. So
Mm,
I think of vodka, I think of Russians and French. Again, they grow grapes. That's a big commodity for them. They make wine. So naturally, I think it follows. And the thing with Ireland, which was I thought was funny, is the Irish Catholic were oppressed by the Protestant Catholics from England, and they weren't allowed to do a lot of things. Like they weren't allowed to make alcohol. And a lot of the farmers had stills, you know what a still is, right?
sure. Hmm.
And they made it, and they I think they did use potatoes and other things. But if they got caught, they got fined or put in jail. Yeah. So
You know, but if you think about it, I don't think the connotation is the same for like French wine and Irish whiskey, Irish beer.
now,
I, my whole life it's been like, oh, Irish, and it goes, oh, over drinking, right? So, yeah,
yes,
and
I
not,
think,
that, and it's hidden too. It's hidden within families,
and I really believe it's because they had such a hard life, like especially certain parts of Ireland, like County Mayo.
right?
And I mean, talk about Hitler trying to wipe out the Jews. I really believe that the Protestant Catholics, well, Catholics, like I said, the Protestants from England, the lords, the upper class, the royal people, wanted to get rid of the poor Irish Catholics.
Mm.
If that makes sense. If you weren't going to be a Protestant, they weren't going to have anything to do with you. They took their land. They would walk right in and take their land. The only way my ancestors got to keep their land is they had it for over 100 years.
Mm.
They had it for over 100 years in the family. They couldn't take it.
Have you
But
communicated with any of them? I know you haven't been there, but have you communicated with any of them?
not anybody over there. Just in the United States, I found a first cousin, so that's wonderful. I'm one of communication.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah. I took a break from that research because I ended up writing two more books and having a podcast and a YouTube show.
Yeah.
And I take care of my husband who has Parkinson's and, a lot going on. But I will be getting back into it and doing some deeper research, let's say, you know.
Well, it's great, and it fits our podcast because there are associations with it. And
It
Mimi, I'll let you go for this part with this. As they say, it's not just alcohol, right? You certainly got the Irish gift for gab,
Oh, I did.
and that's a good thing.
It is.
That's great. Well, the book, and you can find the book on Amazon. We'll put a link to that for you all. The book is
Mhm.
called Irish Roots, right? And
No, it's called Unearthing My Irish Roots.
unearthing your
Yeah,
Irish
because I
roots.
had to dig them up
Yeah. Well, that's
to get
great.
it, right?
That's
Yeah,
great. For those of you listening, we so enjoy you listening. I hope you enjoy these. We hope that you find yourself, feel good about yourself. Thanks for listening. Be safe and keep the faith.
that's right.
Okay.
Thanks.
That now that's done. So however
Good.
you want to pick up, that was great.
Yeah, I just want to touch on a couple points. Like, Irish, yes, you think drinking. But then Scotch, you think what? That they're tight with money, right?
Mm.
Scottish people. Like I think when I grew up in my neighborhood, there was no politically correct when I grew up. We weren't politically
No,
correct.
no.
No, no. You would say, oh, he's now people don't get offended. This is what they said, not what I said. They would say, oh, he's a dumb Polak
Hmm.
because he was Polish, right? Yeah. The Italians, we were guineas. They call us guineas. That was the way it was. They had an association that if you were a certain nationality, that's what you were. Any Polish person was done. Now, can you imagine? But we grew up that way. So when you're a child and you're growing up, you have no other influence other than your parents and the people
Hmm.
around you. So you're going to take that in until you get old enough and get out in the world to find out that's not true. Right. But yeah, it was. Did you find that where you lived?
Yeah, I was thinking back as you were saying that to high school, right?
Mhm.
And I would even hear from adults, "Oh, McGowan, Mick, you're
Oh,
Irish, huh?
you're a Mick. You're a
Yeah,
Mick.
you're Irish." So, and the first thing they would comment on was drinking,
Yeah.
almost every single time. And of course, that might have been a joke, except it was a problem in my family.
Yes, it
So
was.
it was no joke growing up, like it wasn't for you, right? When people made fun of drinking or Irish drunks, it wasn't funny if you're living it because my dad was not a funny drinker.
Neither was mine.
He was this guy, Mimi. I bet millions of people could identify. He was really a nice guy with a good sense of humor when he wasn't drinking. But when he
Yes.
was, it was unpredictable and not fun. Not fun.
No, and mine, um, he was what they would call a binge drinker, I guess,
Hmm.
because he did keep a job and he worked. And my mother would rather work than be around her children.
Mm.
And she worked all day, day shift, and he worked night shift. So there was this little hour in between where there were no parents in the house. And I was the oldest. And from the time I was like 10, that was my job. I became like a parent to my siblings, right? So he worked, and I give him credit for teaching me things because I was with him during the day, not my mother. So when I come home from school and things like that, he taught me this is the correct way to fold pants. This is how you make a bed, cooking, all these things that you'd learn from your mother, I learned from my father. And then Friday would come, and my brother Joe and I would walk home from school and we'd open the front door. And if there was a quart of beer on the
Mm.
kitchen table, we were like, oh, we knew we were in for a hellish week. He would drink, then he would go to the bars for a while. When he was in the bar, everybody loved him. He was funny and talkative, and he had a grand old time. And then he'd come home after we were gone to bed, right? And he'd sit at that kitchen table and he'd call out one of our names. And you knew it was going to happen. You knew. You just didn't know which one. It was usually the two oldest, me and my brother Joe. If he called me, I'd sit there and he would cry about his life and his all this stuff, and all the hardship and you know, all this pour me a drink, And I wouldn't say a word. I wouldn't say a word. But everything showed in my face and I couldn't help that. And he would say to me, if looks could kill, I'd be dead.
Mm.
So finally he'd get sick of talking to me and I'd go to bed. And then usually he'd pass out. Now, the next night, he'd call my brother Joe down. Well, that's a different story because Joe and him would get into it. My brother Joe, especially when he got to be a teenager, I mean, they'd be rolling around on the floor physically, you know. And the one night, I'll tell you this thing, um, I never saw him touch my mother. But one night I'm in bed and I'm listening to them arguing, and I heard him slap her. I heard it. And I ran down the steps. I think I was about 16. And I pushed him into the back door in the kitchen. And I said, never touch my mother again. But then I got scared. What was going to happen? So I ran out of the house and I hid in the garage for about an hour. And he did go looking for me. But like, I never got beaten. Never. My mother slapped me a few times, but my brother got beat by both parents, you know, and my mother was sober, but she had a lot of resentment, I think. This is like a whole other story, which they have to read, Raised by Wolves, Trapped by Demons, because the dynamic between my parents and all of that is in there.
And
Okay.
it's really good. We had a lot of positive response to that when we had you on.
They're buying the book, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah, or however you read it. I'm not a Kindle guy.
No,
I
there's paperback. You can do
yeah,
that.
I like to feel it and have it, and then
And
I
I
can
have
pass it
Audible.
on too.
And I have Audible too.
Yeah,
It's on
right,
Audible. Yeah.
right.
But the thing about that is it goes into a lot more of my father's psyche.
Hmm.
And I'll end this one with a teaser. How's that? We like to end our podcast with like a little um, I believe truly that my father was gay. And that's in the book. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons for that. And I never saw him even kiss my mother, like really.
Hmm.
But there were a lot of reasons, which I won't go into, but I have a lot of evidence in the book that he was. And there was an incident that happened when I was out of the house that was a lawyer had to be involved because it was involving two young boys. That's what I'll say. So there was a lot of scandal, you know.
Well, but going back to your when you were talking about laying in your bedroom,
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
I flashed on the same thing. I bet you there are millions of us who heard, right? Heard that. In fact, I just talked about it, Mimi, yesterday to the group I was talking to, that being young, and I don't remember how old I was, but the word that was used for my dad and my mom was parasite. And I was young enough to not know what it meant, but it stuck with me.
That you were a parasite?
No, no, that she was to him. And then when I found out, and it stuck with me, and then when I found out what the word parasite meant, I was like,
Oh,
wow, that's a lousy thing to say to somebody that they're just, sucking off of you, right?
yes, yes.
And but that's what you lay in bed and hear, and tons worse, the slaps, the violence, and your mind is making it up. But
Yeah. And that is actually abuse. That's
yes.
child abuse. And when I had gone, I think I was 5 years sober, and I got very depressed. And when I went to Cairn Foundation, and they had a family of origin program, and they dealt with those things, they had us write a letter about our childhood and the abuse. And I did not think I was really abused. And then we had to read our letters.
Hmm.
And people were crying when I read my letter. And they said, Mimi, you were abused. You don't realize the mental abuse, the verbal abuse, the being a spectator of someone else being physically abused. That's trauma and abuse. And that's why I had to deal with a lot of stuff for a lot of years. Getting sober, AA is one thing, but counseling was definitely needed. I had to dig deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this
Well,
has been, yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask you one more thing, if it's okay.
Okay.
Do you
All right.
think that my mom then developed a problem? And
Mhm.
as I listened to your story and other women, I
Yeah.
used the term, and I've never heard it used clinically, secondary alcoholic. I think
Uh,
my mom drank in large measure as a reaction, as a
yeah.
coping mechanism
Yeah.
to what she was going through in her life, and then it became a problem.
Yes. I think that would apply to me because I didn't want to drink and I wasn't going to drink. And young adulthood, I wasn't a drinker, but I married an alcoholic. And that's when my alcoholism started because to put up with the abuse I was getting there, at first I was not a drinker. And then
Hmm,
all of a sudden, I think that applies to me. I think that's how I got into it. Yep.
interesting.
Yeah, it's genetic, it's environmental, it's not a choice.
Right,
I don't
right,
think it's a
right.
choice.
No,
No.
it's not.
We're gonna end it there.
All right.
This was a little joint experiment that we had
Yeah,
that
I hope it works. It was fun.
then we'll do something else
All
because
right.
it's a lot of topics about alcohol. So all right.
Sure. All right.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks,
Mimi.
Mike. Have a
You're
great
welcome.
day.